everyone, today we are going to talk about irony. And before we get started, I want to remind you to make sure that you find the irony PowerPoint worksheet on Schoology. This is your assignment that goes along with this PowerPoint presentation. Again, make sure that you use a different color font to answer your questions and write in complete sentences unless otherwise directed. And I just want to mention as well, when I ask you to provide examples, the examples can be from your own personal life, something you have watched on television lately, or something you have read recently, but it can't be the same example that I use within the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so as stated, we are going to talk about irony today. There are three different types of irony that we're going to talk about, but before we do that, we need to discuss what irony actually is. So, irony is the contrast between what appears to be true or what is expected to be true and what turns out to actually be true. So, a lot of times we say that something is ironic, but we don't always think about what that means. Irony is often used to add a deeper level of meaning. Authors usually use irony to make the reader stop and think about the nature of life and the surprises that life has in store for all of us. So, irony is something that is oftentimes easier to recognize than define. It is always the kind of unexpected reversal that happens. So, examples of irony are when the person who needed help with his math homework later develops a multi-million-dollar computer company. You might not expect this to happen. Another example of irony is when the president of the science club grows up to become Hollywood's leading action hero. Again, this is something that is unexpected. It amazes us. Irony can sometimes be thrilling, but it always makes us stop and think. So, the first type of irony that we're going to talk about today is verbal irony. This is the most common form of irony and probably the easiest to recognize. This is when what is said is different from what is meant. So, for example, if I come running into the school building during a thunderstorm and I get to class soaking wet and say, "It's a bit wet out there," I am using irony because if I'm drenched from the thunderstorm, obviously it's a little bit more than a bit wet out there. Sarcasm, which you may know very well, is actually a form of verbal irony. Sarcasm is usually a bit harsher and even a little bit mean, sometimes a lot mean. So, an example of sarcasm would be if one brother says to another brother, "Way to go, genius. With your grades, you'll be 85 years old by the time you graduate." That's kind of mean. Um, it is ironic and it is sarcasm. The second type of irony we're going to talk about is situational irony. This is when a character or the reader expect one thing to happen, but something else, usually the opposite, happens instead. This makes the situation itself ironic. So, for example, if a couple appears in court to finalize a divorce, but during the proceeding they end up remarrying, that would be ironic. They came to the courthouse to separate and ended up getting back together. If on a Friday night you leave with your friends to watch a basketball game, but when you arrive, it's actually a volleyball tournament instead, and the basketball game is on a different night, that is ironic. If you buy yourself something after months and months of saving for it and then someone ends up buying it for you for Christmas, the situation itself is ironic. The last type of irony we're going to talk about is dramatic irony. We are going to talk a lot about dramatic irony throughout the literature we read this year, especially in terms of Romeo and Juliet when we get to that. But dramatic irony is the contrast between what a character knows and what the reader or the audience knows because those may be different. So, an example from earlier this week is Little Red Riding Hood. We know that the wolf is dressed as the grandmother and is out to hurt Little Red, but Little Red, our character, does not know this information. So, as we're reading, we want to tell Little Red to stop, to not get close to the wolf, to realize that it's not actually her grandmother, because we know something that the character does not know. All right, that is our very quick presentation on irony. Remember that you need to complete your irony worksheet and submit to Schoology prior to class tomorrow. Thank you.